Okay, so at this point in the extraction run, I have here my storage tank at 5.6, so that's a pretty good amount. Mind you, obviously every machine is different. I've got my protection pressure here, which makes sure that even if the pressure builds up really, really high, it will protect it because it has a valve, which I will show you. So it's got a valve in each and every single one, where if the reading is too high and the machine deems it very unsafe, all the built up pressure will come out through this valve and it just kind of comes out. And each and every single one of them have these release valves, and so pressure buildup is not an issue. The machine does shut off if the pressure is too high. This is our working pressure. Remember, we said that it was in and around 21.8 to 22 megapascals, which is about 3,000 something psi. So that's fine, and that is the protection pressure reading, because extraction 4, 5, and 6 are all in and around the same pressure. This one's a little high. I think there's some buildup there that I have to take care of at some point. And right now I'm on a cleaning run. So if we look at the what's going on here, I've got my deputy pump switched on. It's green. It says that it has ethanol in it. Sorry, isopropyl alcohol. And that pump is pumping it through these guys. So the deputy pump is pumping only the ethanol because it's quite a small pump, as we had seen from before. That's pumping, the piston's pumping. And then that's what's causing it to move. I've got this valve open. The chiller's coming on. And there was ethanol, or I keep saying ethanol, there was isopropyl alcohol in there, but it has since dispensed it to these chambers that are running. So these chambers that are running, I'm running it on a cleaning run, so these chambers 4, 5, and 6 are empty. Remember the empty vessels that we had seen yesterday? They're empty. And my filter kettle is at the working pressure of 18 megapascals. My separation 1, where the crude usually comes out, has a working pressure of 10. And so it varies slightly, but not enough to kick anything off. You don't want it to vary too much, but a 0.2 or a 0.1 variation is okay. And then I've got my separation 2 and 3, which we said are the fats. So if we are to open this up, this is just my waste, all the fats and the lipids and waxes. If I open that up slowly, all this gunk is going to come out. And that's the inline de-waxing component of this machine. So I have to take care of that because this is manual, completely manual. I have to make sure that I'm always on guard for when it's empty, and it's gonna start to spew out very quickly. So as I notice that the crude oil is getting very sorry, not the crude, the waste. As soon as I notice that the waste is no longer coming out and it's almost empty, it's gonna start to spew out CO2. And so I really have to watch out that when that happens, that I very quickly turn this off. See how it's like slowing down and then speeding up? I just have to kind of interpret that through. It's looking really gnarly right now. Okay. That's just the way that it looks like. When it's lighter, that means there's a lot more CO2 content in it because it's got more bubbles in it. And so I'm gonna slow down my roll here. I'm turning it clockwise, which means I'm closing it. Because it's lefty loosey, righty tighty, right? That's how you remember it. But there, see how it's starting to pop and get really broken up? That's how I know. And I'm gonna start to like hold my breath in and around when I think that it's gonna start to spew out CO2, just in case, you know, it starts to really, there. You know, these are kind of this job is very it's not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of pops and crackling and hissing and, you know, explosion sounds, and it's just something that you have to get used to and really like prepare your heart for. So I'm gonna stop that because I've taken out enough that it's not going to be an issue. You just don't want it to fill up because then it's going to start to back out. So then I'm going to do the same with this one. So this one is a lot browner because of the filter kettle. The filter kettle has a lot of carbon in it. But this one has got more like fats and lipids, which is lighter in color. And sometimes water comes out too, and all the alcohol that I've put in from the cleaning run. And so it's a lot whiter in color, lighter in color. And it's also runnier as well. And so the color of the crude oil, it's going to come out more or less like this, but it's just a lot more amber. It's a lot fluffier too. So you're really looking at the consistency of what's coming out to determine if it's time to very quickly close this valve. Another indication is if it starts to thin out or maybe slow down. So there's quite a bit more lipids that are coming out of this one. It's almost like ice cream, you know, or a snake. Looks like a albino corn snake. There. Now we know it's about to like slow down. Okay, maybe not. I'm incrementally adjusting how my hand is positioned because I'm just waiting for a signal from the machine to say that it's done. So sometimes I'll close it if I think it's getting close. If it's crackling too, that's another good indication that it's about done. And I really won't take my hand off the handle because of that. Imagine if I decided to move the pail with that hand instead, because I didn't have a free hand, then it would just spew out, and then, you know, sometimes I'll get an explosion, a really big explosion, and then I've got like the ceiling covered in that stuff. And it's also like it's very smoky and it hurts your throat, and the CO2 will jump to, you know, 760, that sort of thing. Whereas here it's only 670, and the normal parts per million, ppm, of CO2 should be around 400, like 4 or something. Anyway, so I've got my CO2 flow here, which is pretty healthy, saying around 600 and high 600, low 800 liters. I think it's liters per minute. And what else? Oh yes, so here, oh yes, I remember now. Yeah, so we had the deputy pump, which we had just seen, and we have the main pump that's pumping the ethanol right to these vessels. You see that these are saying that it's empty, and it is, because I had just opened up those valves. And then I've got these guys that are at 21.8, 21.7 megapascals, and then it's also showing that the separation 1 is at 9.9. This is an automatic switch. I never have to turn that myself. And then I've got the filter at around 18, and it also has its own switch. At 18, it'll start to switch on, meaning once it hits that working pressure, then it starts to work on building the pressure of these guys. So it's all in tandem. So at first, you know, say my CO2 is very low in my machine, and I'll know that my CO2 is low when this one is reading like 200, 100, or even 0. If it's reading 300, I'm going to top it up, and depending how low it is will determine how many CO2 tanks I need to make up the CO2 for. So right now I have a representation of 4 tanks here, and that's because those are the drawings that represent these guys. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. And these guys are attached to one line, which is this. And this is the valve, obviously, that shuts this off or turns this on. And it says siphon tube, meaning inside there's like a straw that goes all the way down where it is liquid. Because if this is full, like this much headspace or however much they fill it, will be CO2 gas. And where the fill line is and below would be liquid. And so when it comes to compressing, you know, because you've got a tank for, rather, not a tank, a pump for compression, so that would be the condenser. It'll condense the CO2 back into liquid phase. And so in order to draw out the liquid CO2, you're going to have to draw out from the bottom, which is essentially the siphon tank. And so you siphon it out, go through here. These are closed. You can close it or you can open it. And they have that control because you obviously don't want your CO2 to go crawl out and then that way and then all the way up the other tank. So it's, and also you can technically change out this tank. If this tank is empty, you can change it out and not what's the word? And not involve these other 3 tanks. Meaning I can disconnect this, and if that is closed and this is running, it won't, maybe there will be a little bit of leak, but it's not gonna explode and spew out CO2 even if it's running. I don't like to do that because, you know, you kind of have to keep things safe. And so when it's running, or when I'm topping up CO2 and the other 3 are empty, I'm going to replace those tanks when everything is done. So that's what that was. And that's kind of like the valve that makes sure that it's always open when it's going through. So I have my valves open when I have my CO2 tank open and I've got that valve open, and that will go then into the filter, just a filter, to basically ensure that there's nothing, like no residual gunk or whatever, or water that may have may contaminate my pump. And so from there it'll go into the flow meter, which is my flow meter, and then it'll go through a condenser. And so, because remember that when it leaves the tank, it'll turn into gas phase, because all these pipes here are exposed to atmospheric pressure, which means CO2's phase in atmospheric pressure is gas. And so while it's going and traveling through the filter and the flow meter, it'll be in gas phase. And so we need it back at least to some type of critical pressure, or whatever you want to set it at. It'll condense it into the storage tank. So it's likely that most of the time it'll condense it back to liquid if it's going straight to the storage tank. And so it condenses back into liquid, and then it stores it in the storage tank, and then the storage tank will then distribute it to the vessels via the main pump. And so when the main pump is done pumping this and it reaches the working pressure of 22 megapascal, it will then turn on this inlet 7 switch. It'll turn on, the valve will turn on automatically, and then it will then fill up the filter next. And when the filter climbs up from, let's say, I don't know, 10 megapascals to 18, then it'll consider itself full, and then the V23 or valve 23 switch will come on, and then it will start to build up the pressure of the separation 1 vessel, and then when it reaches 10 megapascal, it will then switch on these other ones, the separation 2 and 3, and that's essentially it. And then, of course, depending on which valves are closed or open, if I turn my valves open for this, it'll go and distribute my CO2 from the main pump to these chambers that I want to fill up. And then the recovery pump, which is this, and these A basically are my vents. So when I vent it out and I open, obviously I'm not going to open this vent because this vent that's running. But right now here my vents are open. If I open it up, let's just pretend that there's still gas in here, and I turn on my recovery pump. When I turn on my recovery pump, then all those vents, all the ventilation channels that are open will pull, because of the pump, will pull it out. All the gas will get pulled out. It'll go through here. So if it were the 1, 2, 3, so only these guys are open, so only these guys will be pulling out, going into your recovery pump, and then it'll go through your filter again. Make sure that there's no residual, crude oil or whatever that's just still sticking around. Maybe like it got gunked up one time or over time. Go through the filter, it'll condense, and then go back to the storage tank, and then redistribute it to these tanks, my 4, 5, 6. And then it just goes like that, It'll just keep going around and around. And then it'll go through the filter kettle, and then it'll go through the first separator, and then whatever gunk or whatever. Oops. That's for changing the parameter, and I don't want to do that. It'll collect every single thing, every single supercritical CO2 that's being carried out of these vessels will then go through the filter, and then whatever the filter cleans out will go to the separator. The separator is where your CO2 will separate from your crude oil. Why? Because look at the temperature. It's enough to make the CO2, critical CO2, go back into the gas phase, and then that will then go back and cycle through via the main pump. And so it's doing that, and then the crude oil will then build up. So you can see there's quite a bit of crude oil built up there. I know I said this is a cleaning run, but it takes out all that residual leftover gunk that's gunking up my system, and I'm cleaning it out through CO2 and the co-solvent, which is isopropanol or isopropyl alcohol. And then again, the fats and the waxes that you've seen that was accumulated there is coming out from separator 2 and 3. Okay, and then so right now these guys are at 0. Why? Because when the recovery pump, which is this one, when the recovery pump stopped, it stopped at 0.5 MPa, which I said was that leftover that the pump no longer detects. I basically opened these guys up all the way, and then it'll take that 0.5 MPa and turn it into 0. And then I'm going to take my Allen wrench or Allen key, whatever. And I'm going to open these guys up because I know they're at 0, so it's safe to open up. It's a little hard doing this one-handed. So that's open. One of the things that you kind of learn as an operator of these machines, because they're quite dangerous, is that you just feel things out. A lot of it comes with experience, but you essentially feel out if something is amiss, you know, like something is different, or, you know, you're feeling a bit of a pressure, because usually this thing slides out very easily, but then this time around it's not. It's kind of like you're experiencing more friction or whatever, and that typically might be because there's pressure buildup and you don't want to open it when there's a lot of pressure. Even if it reads 0, you still have to kind of feel it out and make sure that, you know, because sometimes maybe you're absent-minded and then you're opening the 4th one instead, which is part of the running one. So 1, 2, 3 in tandem. You might be opening this when you meant to open that. And then you're feeling, you know, when you're pulling these, you're feeling that it's very hard to pull. And that might mean that there's a lot of pressure. See how easy that is to pull out? It should slide very easily. Okay, maybe not so easily, but that's the main idea, you know. It's hard doing it with one hand, but basically, let me just actually put this down so I can do a proper job of taking this out. And so you can see here that there's a cap, which I will take out, and in another demo I'm gonna just show this part in action. I can't hold the phone when I'm doing this because it's gonna be very involved, because I need to hold this thing, and you know, usually I have a partner with me and I can't be distracted. But just to give you a sneak preview, this will essentially clamp down to one of those guys, and that's how it's done. Yeah, so I'll just show, I guess, a little bit of anatomy of this particular thing. So these guys are essentially where it's sliding on. These rods are reinforced by this bracket, and then it's attached to this, which is attached to basically the main body. So it's pretty hard to rip off, you know, even if this were to pop up, you know, first there's a sliding side to side rather than up and down, and so that's hard to rip off. And because this is attached to the sliding thing, which is attached to the main body, it's pretty hard to rip off. Although if you had enough pressure, for sure you'd be able to rip it off, and then at that point it's just too late and you should just leave. But there are obviously emergency stop button and automatic shut off, and also these emergency valves that prevent it from doing so, and there's also an alarm so that you know what's happening. But yeah, that's essentially what it is. And then I open this up and then you'll see the inside of it. So yeah, that's basically it for this part. I'll be able to make another demo for when we're doing the other stuff. But for now, this is part 1 of the demo. I hope you guys enjoyed it.